Everybody tonight, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Just want to let you know that we're going to be talking tonight on Lesson 8, Talking to Your Kids, Part 1. Means 13 years old becomes before 21 years of age. And the title of the book is, the chapter is 13 comes before 21. All right, so let's go to the Lord in prayer before we get into the lesson tonight. Dear Lord, thank you for everything that you do. Please bless me as a speaker and a teacher and educator of this lesson series, dealing with talking to your kids and how we project our real walk and talk is really what our kids emulate in their lives, and help, Lord, that these will be great nuggets to new parents and even for people that are maturing parents as they're raising their children, whatever age that they may be or where they're at in their situation in their life. And help that they can apply these specific models of rules of teaching to their daily conduct as they raise and nurture their children. In Jesus' name, pray, amen. So far, we've spent a considerable amount of time focusing on the words say each day to your children. You know, what are the words that you usually say each day to your children? You have seen the very power and the importance of everyday talk. It says, now I would like for you to consider just how long term the very impact of everyday talk is after all. Parenting itself is a long-term task. It's not part-time here. It says the goal for child rearing is to help your children grow into live adults and active adults who are, mature and have the right skills so they can impact on their children, and also who really love and honor God in all of life situations, even if it is an awesome task to do so. All right? So you probably have some ideas about your child's future, don't you? And you could describe the kind of adult you hope for he or she that they will become. At least in general terms, of course. It says, but between now and then will come the teenage years. All right, 13 becomes before 21. It's a good title for this chapter. It says, and all your children will be teenagers before they are, before they become adults. Now, should you prepare for the teenage years? That's a question. And the answer is yes. Parents frequently complain about the difficulties of living with teens. It says, going through all the rebellious things that they go through and all their undesirable friends who they hang with, and bad influences that they pick up or adopt, and bad music taste that they listen to, and moodiness, and of course sullenness, etc. Says too often that description is accurate. But what do we do about it? Well, in the first chapter, this is where we noted some statistics from the Index of Leading Cultural Indicators, where it says teenagers talk less than 35 minutes a week with their own fathers. It says, in contrast, the same teenagers watch about 21 hours of television each week. Says, picture these statistics as a sports box score. Okay, and here we have the home team, which is dad. 35 minutes is a picture here of work, and then we have the visiting team, which happens to be the television, which is 21 hours. Which happens to be 1,260 minutes each week that they spend watching the TV. Now, it doesn't take much to figure out who is really winning here and who is losing the very battle of influence. says every minute a teenager talks with dad, he or she spends 36 minutes with watching the television set. Says the visitors are cleaning up the house, wouldn't you say? They're taking the lead on shaping the morals, the attitudes of our children. Wouldn't you say? Because it's true, they are. Now and that's a problem. Now this is a question that the above number reveals to us. It is a breakdown between parents and their children. Now teenagers greatly used good counsel. It says, yet in the family after family, teenagers seldom seek the very counsel of their parents. It means they go to their friends instead, and that's where they should not go. Okay. Tensions often arise. It says often run very high. It says mistrust is quite common. Conversations are limited to being very short, invasive, and quite aggravating. It says it is easy to understand why the home team is losing this battle so often. It says most of you know as families have families with good relationships between parents and teenagers, but you may even want to point them out as uncommon. Often they're more uncommon that they're not good than those homes that do have them, sadly to say. But this underscores the real concern here, and that is the good relationships are unusual. It says you do not need any detailed studies to tell you that. The teenage years are quite difficult ones for teenagers too as well, and also for their parents. It says the question is, does it have to be this way though? And the answer is no, it doesn't. It says if you have young children in your home, you can prepare now for the upcoming years that come ahead of the teenage years. It says by your everyday talk and walk. Your everyday talk is one that is a very important tool that parents have to keep the very lines of communication open at all times between themselves and their teenagers or teenagers to be. It says if you already have teenagers in your home and things are sometimes or often rocky, let's examine your everyday talk to see whether or not you are using this tool to help or to hinder your relationship with your growing kids. It says for your everyday talk to be the successful tool that God wants for us, you must be responsive to the differences that seem to emerge each and every day as your children grow into adulthood. Now, each new set of daily experiences adds to another layer or dimension to your child. It says my oldest son basically is 24 years old. This is what the author says, but yet I can still see him in my very mind as being a child. It says when we brought him home from the very hospital as a newborn baby, many changes had to be made or taken place in his life ever since then. I can no longer treat him as an infant like he was when he was a newborn. Okay? A toddler or a young child or now as a teenager. Okay? All parents have to learn on how to adapt to these changes in order for everyday talk to help to be more effectively as a tool. Now, as children grow to be mature young adult people later on, or even as young people, who love God and want to seek after Him, says, while this is simple enough to understand in theory, says the point is often lost in the everyday life of simply put, says your everyday talk must change in style and also in content as your children grow older. Says, for example, it is time to go to bed now. Says, right now. Says, my work just fine. Might just work fine for you 3 years for a 3-year-old, but however, your 12-year-old may be an entire different situation altogether, because they tend to want to stay up and they tend to want to test you and tend to want to push their limits. See, when they get older, they do that more so than when they're 3. They just do what they're told more so, but when they get older, they know how to work you a little bit. So just kind of prepare for that. Says you might answer, says, why should there be a difference? Well, let's look at that. Well, a command and any child should obey regardless of what age he or she is, right? Or whether he or she is 3 or even 12 years old, right? It says, but it is true that a child should obey their parents. But remember that you also have the responsibility to present commands as precious gifts that are coming from God. According to Proverbs chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. You must work to make your directions your everyday talk. Make them desirable, attractive, and wise to your children. It says, in short, you must consider your listener take great care when giving these directions. It says your primary concern must be to help the hearer, which is your child. Your primary consideration is not to give what you think are clear commands. You may be clear, but you also may be exasperating your child. Okay? Now, clearly is only one consideration here, and that's God. God wants for you to understand the very impact that your words have on your children, including other people in general. And this principle is taught in Ephesians 4, verse 29. It says, and it has quite significant implications here for parental instructions. Now we're not gonna read that to save time. I have listed 3 translations to help you grasp the very full impact of this provocable passions. It's so important. The first one is, let no unwholesome word or words proceed from your very mouth. It says, but only such a word as is good for edification according to the need of the moment, so that it will give grace to all those who hear it. That's from the New American Standard Version. The next version, how you can read this passage from Ephesians, is, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your very mouths. It says, but only what is helpful for building others up, according to their needs, that it may benefit all those who listen. That's from the NIV, the New International Standard. The last one is, don't let a single rotten word come out of your mouth. It says, but rather, whatever is good for constructive, meeting problems that arise, so that your words may help all those who hear it. And that's from the CCNT. I'm not sure what that stands for right now. I should have looked that up. Okay. Now, let's look at the verse carefully. Both the New International Version, which is the NIV, and the New American Standard use of how the word unwholesome is to be translated. Now the word is found in the original Greek as sepros or sapros. Okay, sapros I think is the word. The word certainly does not mean unwholesome, but it is the original word. It is a stronger expression than it is in our everyday speech of English, in the English language. All right. The linguistic key to the Greek New Testament says that sapros is the word that's translated into unwholesome, which means rank, foul, protrude, rotten, worthless, disgusting, and you can see that the Greek word carries more force along with it than unwholesome does in everyday speech that we use in English. It says in the CCNT translation, it is closer to the mark by using the word rotten for sapros, because that's really what it's saying. It's more stronger language. All right. So what kind of language is it that Paul considers rotten or foul or rank or disgusting? Well, this word certainly includes cursing or swearing. It says, but again, much more is meant by Paul. Now look closely at what Paul is making a contrast to. This is where he's saying, don't speak rotten words, but rather with words that build up and benefit the hearer. So if the language does not benefit your listener, then it may be considered as rotten language. Now Paul says this implicitly, as typically of him usually, doesn't leave any middle ground here when he says this. He gets right to the point. He directs us to use only words that build up. Okay? Now he says, let no rotten words be used. It says, but only words that build up. Okay? So according to the need of the moment, when the heat of the moment, hey parents, come on, grandparents, aunts and uncles, so forth. It says from the context of this, all right, says verse, says then it is quite fair to say that what Paul really considers to be rotten usage of words is any word that does not benefit the hearer, so as to build him or her up. This covers much, much more than just four-letter words that you say, okay? It also includes all those words that tear down as well. Parents, okay? Now, Paul's description to you as parents means that you must understand how your words will impact your very child or children. Now, are you aware of your speech patterns that you have that will exasperate, meaning anger your children or child? It says, will your direction be received as demeaning from your child's perspective? All right. Now, if it will, then your language can be classified as being unwholesome or rotten at that point, because it does not benefit your listener. Now, Paul says in 2 Corinthians 13, verse 10, that the purpose of authority is to build one up and not to tear down. Okay? So you must carefully consider whether your everyday talk to your kids is really building them up or tearing them down. Now, this means that God wants for you to be aware of how your children are being, or how they are responding to your very words. Now, it is easy to focus on what you want for your children to do or not do. But you must always be, this is so important here, concerned with how your directions impacts your children as a whole. Now, want to move this up. It says, for example, a 10-year-old boy by the name of Caitlin has had a bad day at school. So some friends were unkind. Oh, okay, Caitlin. I thought it was a boy. Sorry. Were unkind to her at church. So you could say school or church. She has discovered that she is no longer considered to be in with some of the popular girls that she hangs normally around with. She is very sad and despondent around the house. She's pouting, and her dad doesn't know why she is doing this. She's down, but reasons that she needs to snap out of it. So he says to her something like, Caitlin, it is not good for you to be so down like you're being. Your attitude is discouraging everyone else in the house. Says God wants for you to be happy and pleasant to others. So I want for you, Caitlin, to exercise some self-control of your emotions and stop being so sad right now. Stop being so sad right now, okay? It is time for you to snap out of this mood that you're in. Now, that sounds kind of good, doesn't it? But really, you're going to see here in a minute it's not. Okay? Because now to this exercise, some self-control and stop being so sad right now, okay? All right, now, let me read this. Okay, I basically read that. Now, even though everything he said was true about the whole situation, but these words, okay, this is so important, were not helpful for her, but they were rotten. Now, Caitlin should not be down and gloomy, but she does need to remember that she has much to be thankful for, to God. And yet these words spoken in this very context constitute rotten words or speech. It says these words were spoken without giving any attempt to listen first to her, to find out what's going on. The dad just went boom, bam, 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 instead of just asking her what's going on, So to understand what would benefit Caitlin best in her struggle at the moment, says there was no attempt to find out what or why she was so sad. Says for a child Caitlin's age, says finding out suddenly that she is being excluded from the group of girls that she normally hangs around with at church, were friends, is quite devastating to her. Of a blow as far as socially goes, because that means a lot, at that age. So saying things that are true, but not for an appropriate time, all right, to the situation, will lead to a breakdown in communication between you and in the relationship and your child. It says once dad is able to emerge and get information to understand what Caitlin is struggling with, then he can begin to bring the right, scriptural principles to bear. So he knows how to best deal with the situation to give her advice and kind of help calm her and get her, Now, parents, this is where frustration often takes root in a parent's relationship. It says, with his growing children, he says things that he knows are true and should be helpful, but in this case they're not. Now he becomes upset as a parent when he sees that his words are met with silence, anger, or indifference. Okay? His child, on the other hand, is also frustrated at the parent. Okay? And she is, really hurting from apparently being, tossed aside by her so-called friends. Says this is all that she can think about, right now in her mind. And all Dad can do is just spout rules and regulations and behavior attributes of how she should be. Dad doesn't know, and Dad doesn't care, is what she sees. All right, so this kind of breakdown can lead to some rough times ahead. Says at least part of the solution is speaking, words that are hopefully that will meet the problem of that moment. Okay? So Ephesians 4 verse 29 has much to say about on how to talk with your children. Okay? Says you must use words that consider the needs of your children so that he or she is helped by them. The words that you give. All right, now, having laid this very framework down, let's return to the theme for this very chapter. Age 13 is an important milestone in the life of your children, your child. It says, at this age, your child or children becomes a teenager, or he or she is beginning to emerge into adulthood. Says these years are quite difficult at times. Says the process of maturing from child to an adult is quite challenging. Says think of all that has to happen in just a few short years. Says the parent-child relationship must change from total dependency or total dependence, I was right, just use a different word, and obedience to and submission to relative independence, respect, and honor instead of immediate obedience and immediate accountability to God and to church. Now, apart from the parents, says this is a drastic change that takes place. Sometimes it seems that within mere moments, your child or children seem to have left the home and have been replaced with this teenager person, sort of like a stranger. All right, now this person is the same one that is born from 13 years and earlier, too, but he or she is also quite different. It says the switch to teenager is often traumatic for all who are concerned. It says the parents really weren't expecting him or her, and often neither was the teenager. So everyone may be quite surprised here at this point when this transition is taking place. It says, so the new teenager is feeling and thinking and wondering and exploring about these changes and things that are new to him or her as well. So you both are on different ground here because you both are experiencing these things too. So you're not alone. Okay, this might help. Okay. So new things are now happening to his or her body. There's hair that is growing in new places, and the boy's voice is changing, and body takes on a different shape, and it is also changing on the inside too as well. And it is now ready to produce children. Baby chemistry is different. Life is different. Now imagine the following scenario. Okay? Now suppose I've told you that you were going to have a house guest that was over in your home that is 13 years from now. Now, this house guest would most likely be quite different from the people now in your home, and you would not have the option to decide whether or not this new guest would come, you would be required to provide all of his or her support and needs and be responsible for his or her actions as soon as he arrives into your home. Now, this might be argumentative. This person might be, he might or she might be argumentative, quite argumentative, selfish. Furthermore, this new guest in your home would be residing in your home for at least the next 6 years. Now remember here, you don't have a choice here as to whether this new guest comes or not, because they're going to come when they turn teenagers. But let's keep going on in here in this scenario. But this is something hopefully that will help you if you're dealing with this as parents right now and this transition. Okay, so well, you might ask me for some background data so that you can know exactly what to expect when he or she arrives there. Says that's a good idea, but I would have to respond and say honestly to you that I don't know what he or she will be like. Says you will see. Says the next 13 years will be quite critical in determining that. So I really don't know until he or she gets here. All right? But let me warn you, though, that if things don't go so well in this person's life for the next 13 years, then things could be... It's enough. These things could be pretty miserable for the next 6 years if he or she is with you. Okay, so that's just so important. Let's stop there and we'll do part 2 of talking to your kids. See you in a minute.